Alright, so you saw in the previous video how to optimize and how to tweak the irradiance particles and how to get basically the best quality render in the least amount of time possible. Okay, with that done, what we're going to do next is we're going to focus on these parameters down here, the environment parameters. These are actually pretty important parameters and can impact render time as well as render quality. Okay, so far this render here I have in my render view was done with just the irradiance particles from direct lighting. That is to say, the light coming from the sun and the light coming from the area light that's just above the ceiling right here. However, there were no irradiance particles computed for the environment. What do I mean by the environment? I'm talking about the physical sky shader that's on the outside of this scene. That's the mental ray physical sun and sky we created in the first video here in the series of this in the first video of this chapter on irradiance particles. Okay, now what happens is that these environment parameters can allow irradiance particles to not just sample, say, the direct lighting coming from the sunlight itself or the area light just above the ceiling here, but irradiance particles can also sample the environment. And in this case, the environment that we created in our scene is based off of the physical sun and sky system from mental ray. That means we should be getting some nice bluish colors here coming from the sky, but we're not right now. And that's because earlier I had turned the environment off. Now we're going to turn it back on. But before I do, for test rendering purposes, what I'm going to do is start lowering some of these settings down to get ourselves some faster renders. So I'm going to take the rays, I'm going to knock them down to 32. The density is set at 0.1 right now. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to lower it to 0.05. And for the environment, I'm going to take the rays and I'm going to also put those at 32. And the environment scale I'm going to leave alone at 1. This works the same way as the scale here for the regular irradiance particles. Basically, if you lower the scale of the environment, the environment rays won't affect as much. If you increase the scale, the environment rays will become brighter. Okay. Now, if I do a render at this moment, it's not going to be a very good render because we won't be able to see the environment rays too well. What I want to do is kind of break the two apart so that I can isolate the environment rays, so it's easier for me to illustrate and for you to see what's going on with the environment rays. So what I'm going to do is, let me close this. I'm going to go ahead and take, let me close that as well. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go up to Window. I'm going to go to Outliner. Editor, edit that out of the video, edit that out of the video. Start again in 3, 2, 1. And in the outliner, I'm going to go up here to the show menu. I'm going to go to objects, and I'm going to click on lights. That way I can only see the lights in my scene, which is the area light just above the ceiling and the sunlight that was created with the physical sun and sky system. So let me select both of these lights, and I'm going to hit Control and H to hide them. Let me close that window. Now, because they're hidden, they won't actually render out. So if I turn environment off, for example, and I go ahead and do a test render here, it actually emitted importans. Unfortunately, there's really nothing there for the importans or irradiance particles to work with, because as you can see, the render just comes out pure black. There's nothing there. That's because I hid my lights. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the environment on. I'm going to leave it at environment rays of 32 with a scale of 1, and the density is pretty good. So let's render that out. And it's actually rendering out pretty fast, and that's thanks to the fact that I changed the settings to more preview friendly settings. Okay, so now we can see that we actually have something. There's lots of artifacts and it looks pretty bad. That's because we're using preview settings, but you can see that there's this nice soft bluish environment hue coming from the environment shader on the outside. Pretty cool, huh? Another neat thing is that we can actually control the brightness of the environment here two ways. We can control it by increasing the scale. For example, I can take the scale and maybe increase it to 5. Render this out again. And we can see that it's much brighter than before. Okay, so I'm going to take the scale and I'm going to knock it back down to 1, how it was before. Another way that we can control the brightness of that environment is by controlling the actual environment shader itself. In this case, we can come up here to the environment section of the indirect lighting tab where it says physical sun and sky, and click on this little input button over here on the right next to the delete button. Don't click on the delete button or you'll delete the whole system. Just click on the input button. It'll open up an attribute editor window where you can automatically start to adjust some of the physical sky shader attributes. Now you notice that the first parameter appears multiplier, and we did talk about this in an earlier video, but now you're going to see how it relates to irradiance particles. We can take that multiplier and we can say increase it to something like 10, which is pretty insane. I'm going to render this out. It's probably going to be blown out and super bright, but we'll see in a moment. And there it is. It is pretty bright. It's not blown out. It actually looks pretty cool. It looks very interesting actually. But it looks very realistic, to be honest with you. And you can see here that by increasing the multiplier on the physical sky shader, we can actually increase the brightness of the environment rays being created by the irradiance particles algorithm. Pretty cool, huh? And you could do that with just about any type of environment. So if the environment was an image instead of the physical sky, increasing the brightness of the image would increase the brightness of the environment rays from the irradiance particles. So let's set that multiplier back down to something like, I think I'm going to go with 2. I think 2 would actually look pretty cool. I'm going to close that attribute editor window, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to render it again. Now with a multiplier of 2. So it's not going to be as dim as the first render, but hopefully it'll be a little bit brighter. Not too bright, but just bright enough. Okay, that's not too bad. I'll say I'm happy with that. Alright, now we see that we have all this artifacting. So how do we get rid of all of this artifacting? Well, it's very simple. We do the same thing that we did in the previous video. You see, the environment rays work the same way as these primary rays. Okay? What you do is you just follow the same workflow. Take the density and we'll put it to something like, say, 0.1. And we'll take the environment rays and we'll set that to something like 500. And that'll work out pretty good. Now we could increase this environment scale if we wanted to, and I think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to increase the environment scale to 2. And before I actually commit to doing a render that takes a couple of minutes, I'm going to take the environment rays and knock that back down to 32. I'm going to take the density and knock that back down to 0.01, or 0.02 is just fine. It doesn't like to go below 0.02. So what I'll do is I'll simply render this out again. It'll render out very quickly. If we open up the output window, we can see it's only, right now, only 6,000. If I go back up here, track that down, and it's a little bit difficult to find here with all of these parameters here, all of this information. Here we go. Right now we did 6,000 irradiance particles. It's actually less than before, because before I was using density of 0.1 and I accidentally tried to put in 0.01 for whatever reason. Never really was a numbers person, to be honest with you. So here we go, very few number of importance, but it rendered out very fast, only 6 seconds. Excellent. And we can see that the environment lighting here looks pretty bright, looks pretty nice. I like it. So I'm going to say that I'm happy with an environment scale of 2 and a multiplier of 2 for the environment shader, the physical sky. So let's take the density and let's put that to 0.1 like we did in a previous video. And we're going to take the environment rays and let's put that to about 500 so we can get ourselves a good render. So let's go ahead and render this out, see what we end up with. And since this is going to take a couple of minutes, what I'm going to do is just pause the video and I'll come back when it's finished. Okay, so I finished rendering out and it rendered out pretty quick. The first thing you're going to notice is a couple of main things. Number one, even though we used 500 environment rays, which is what we used in the previous video for the primary rays, it only rendered out in 38 seconds. Another thing that you'll notice is that there are some artifacts. As you can see in this back wall, in the corners where it meets the other wall here, there is some pretty bad artifacting. Okay? Very close to the ceiling here on the edges, there's some artifacting. On the floor where it meets the walls, there's some artifacting. So basically, all the places where there's detail, like where geometry meets up in two corners, or several corners in this case, what we get is a pretty substantial amount of artifacting. However, it only rendered out in 38 seconds, which is extremely fast. So you can see that the environment rays works a little bit differently than the primary rays. What we need to do is increase those environment rays to something higher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase them to about 600 rays, and now we'll render this out again. Okay, it took only 44 seconds to render that out. We can see we still have some artifacting here that doesn't seem to be going away. So what we'll probably have to do is increase the density. We may not have enough importance for the irradiance particles to work with here. So I'm going to increase the density to about 0.2. And I'm going to render this out again. It's going to take a little bit longer to render, but that's okay. Okay, so it finished rendering. This time it took 1:17 to render, which still isn't that bad. And we can see a lot of the artifacting went away. And what's left now is basically a job for anti-aliasing to come in and clean up and fix. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to introduce my primary rays here by bringing back my lights. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and close this. I'm going to open up the outliner. So I'll use the hotbox this time. Hold down the space bar to do that. I'll go to Window. I'll go to Outliner. I'll select both of these lights here, and I'll hit Control and H. I'm sorry. I'll hit Shift and H to unhide them. There we go. And now that they're back, they can do their job. So let's take the rays here and let's put that at about 500. And let's go ahead and let's render this out again. This is going to take a pretty good while to render because now we're using 500 primary rays and 600 environment rays. So what I'm going to do is just pause the video and I'll come back in a moment. But just really quick here, I'm going to open up this output window so I can monitor what's going on. And I want to see basically how many importans are being used in this scene right now. Okay, there it is. It's about 60,000 irradiance particles or importans. That's a pretty high number of importans. But with the added number of importans, this will allow the irradiance particles to work with more importans and give us a pretty good result. Okay, so it just finished. Let me go ahead and lower that output window. It took about 5.5 minutes exactly, actually 5 minutes 30 seconds, and we have ourselves a great render. Look at this. We have ourselves some nice direct lighting coming from the sun outside. This area light adds a whole lot to it. Then we have the light bouncing around in the room, and we have this nice soft bluish hue from the light that's coming from the sky, from the actual environment in this virtual 3D world, which looks excellent. So very beautiful, very nice. The next thing would be to increase the quality, the anti-aliasing of the renderer here, to go ahead and create a nice smooth image. Of course, you want to make sure before you do that, you come over here to the Irradiance Particles parameters and turn Rebuild off, or else you're going to accidentally have to wait another 5.5 minutes to rebuild the Irradiance Particles map again. So very important, don't forget that. So this looks very realistic, very photorealistic. Looks exactly what a room like this would probably look like in real life if you were to build a real room like this. So there you go. That's Irradiance Particles for you, how to work with the environment rays as well as the primary IP rays, IP being short for Irradiance Particles. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope this demystified Irradiance Particles for you. I know there's not a lot of documentation out there for it, and there really is no video training, professional video training for it. So fortunately, you picked up this product and you learned how to use Irradiance Particles for Maya 2009. So that's going to do it for... So with that said, that's going to do it for this training product from i3 Tutorials. It's our first training product on Maya. We're rolling out a bunch of new training on Maya very soon. I hope that you come back for all your training needs to us, as we have a lot more exciting and much cooler projects coming down the pike. So, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm i3D Jack from everybody here at i3 Tutorials. Thanks a lot for your support. If you've got any questions or comments or anything, or you just want to drop by and drop us a line, be sure to visit our forums at www.i3tutorials.com and check out some of the cool new training products we're rolling out all the time. And some of the stuff we've already got on our website. Some of the stuff is really good and is picked up by some guys from top studios around the world. Okay, so that's going to do it for this training product. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for your support. And I'll see you next time for i3 Tutorials.